Okay, so let's get right into it. You sent us some pretty concerning research about the U.S. dollar.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of experts sounding the alarm. Economists, financial analysts, even geopolitical strategists are all starting to question whether the dollar can hold on to its position as the world's reserve currency.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The sources you sent paint a picture of a world where the dollar's actually losing its grip. And it's not just talk. We're seeing this happen in real time. France is cutting deals in yuan. Saudi Arabia is even hinting at selling oil and other currencies.
Right. Think about that for a second. The
Yeah.
world's biggest oil exporter shifting away from the dollar.
Exactly. And then you've got the BRICS nations actively building a whole new system designed to challenge the dollar's supremacy.
Yeah, it's a big deal. When we talk about the dollar's role, we have to understand this concept of exorbitant privilege.
Exorbitant privilege.
Yeah, basically it means that the U.S. gets special perks because its currency is the global reserve currency. It's like having a VIP pass for the global economy.
So like better deals, special treatment, getting to cut in line.
Exactly. This exorbitant privilege lets the U.S. borrow money more cheaply, gives it more influence on global financial markets, and even helps keep things stable. But the sources you sent suggest that this privileged position might be slipping away.
Interesting. So you're saying this VIP pass might be expiring soon.
Well, economist Zoltan Pozsar argues that U.S. economic dominance is fading. We're moving towards a multipolar world where the dollar isn't the only game in town.
It's like the cool kids table at school isn't so cool anymore.
Yeah, something like that.
Everyone's realizing they can sit somewhere else.
And maybe have a better time, right? And the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they're not just talking about this shift, they're actively building alternatives.
They're serious about this.
Oh, yeah. The sources detail their plans for a new BRICS payment system, for example. They're creating financial assets denominated in their own currencies. And get this, they're even considering using gold and other commodities to settle trade imbalances.
Wow. So they're literally building their own financial playground with their own rules and their own currency swings.
That's one way to put it. And it's not just them. Even countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, traditionally strong U.S. allies, are buying up tons of gold. They're diversifying their reserves, hedging their bets in case the dollar takes a tumble.
So even the U.S.'s friends aren't so sure about the dollar anymore.
The fact that they're taking these steps really says a lot about how the global landscape is changing. There's a growing sense of unease with a system that's been dominated by the U.S. dollar for decades.
And one of the sources really highlighted this by pointing out how Saudi Arabia is openly talking about selling oil and other currencies, even the Chinese yuan.
That's a huge deal,
Yeah.
especially when you consider the petrodollar system, which has been so crucial for the dollar's global dominance since the 1970s.
Remind me how that works again?
The petrodollar system basically makes it so oil transactions have to be done in U.S. dollars. This creates a constant global demand for the greenback.
I see. So if that system starts to unwind, the impact on the U.S. economy could be massive.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even trickier. There's this concept called Triffin's dilemma, which basically says that because the U.S. issues the global reserve currency, it's forced to run constant trade deficits.
Wait, so to keep the global economy going, the U.S. has to keep pumping out dollars, even if it means going deeper and deeper into debt.
Yeah, you could simplify it like that. The problem is this constant need to supply dollars to the world leads to a mountain of debt. And eventually, this could erode confidence in the dollar, potentially triggering a currency crisis.
It's like playing Jenga. The more blocks you pull out to keep building higher, the more unstable the whole thing becomes.
You got it. And the sources point to Japan as a cautionary tale. They've been doing this thing called financial repression for decades.
Financial repression? What is that?
They basically keep interest rates artificially low and buy up huge amounts of government debt to try and manage their economy.
So instead of letting the market determine interest rates, the government's controlling them.
Right. And it's not without consequences. Japan's economy has stagnated. They have a ton of debt, and their currency is extremely vulnerable to shocks.
So it's like they're trying to hold back the tide, but eventually the water's going to find a way through.
Exactly. And while the U.S. has a much bigger economy, they're not immune to these same forces.
Okay. And the sources also talked a lot about the rush to buy gold, especially by central banks. Is this a sign that they're losing faith in the dollar?
Well, gold is often seen as a safe haven, a hedge against inflation and currency devaluation. When countries start stockpiling gold, it suggests they're preparing for a future where the dollar might not be as reliable as it once was.
So everyone's getting ready for a storm and stocking up on supplies.
That's a good way to think about it. And there's another interesting point. In China, gold is now trading at a premium compared to Western markets.
So they're paying more for gold than we are.
Yeah, which means the demand in the East is massive. It raises questions about who's better positioned to navigate a potential shift in the global financial order.
And then there's Bitcoin.
Ah, yes, the wild card.
Even though the sources didn't talk about it directly, it's hard to ignore the rise of Bitcoin as a decentralized, non-governmental currency.
Yeah, especially in this conversation about de-dollarization.
Bitcoin's fixed supply and resistance to censorship, not to mention its ability to transfer value across borders quickly and cheaply, make it very appealing to those looking for a safe haven from the volatility and potential manipulation of government-controlled currencies.
It's especially attractive in countries with economic instability or where trust in the government is low.
Imagine a world where Bitcoin becomes a major player in global trade and finance, a system where you don't have to trust any government or institution with your money.
It's a fascinating idea. While it's still early days for Bitcoin, its potential to disrupt the traditional financial system is undeniable. If it gains wider adoption, it could seriously challenge the dollar's dominance and reshape the global monetary landscape.
This is where things get really interesting. All these forces are converging: the decline of the dollar, the rise of alternative currencies, and a growing distrust of the established financial system. It feels like we're on the verge of a major shift.
The potential for a seismic shift in the global financial order is definitely real. It's essential to stay informed to understand these trends and what they could mean. The future of money might look very different from what we're used to.
And that brings us to a crucial question. What does all this mean for the average person?
Right. While we can't predict the future with certainty, the signs are pretty clear that the dollar's reign is in jeopardy. The world is changing, and we need to start thinking about how to adapt.
So the question is, how do we adapt to this new reality?
Well, the sources you've shared give us a great starting point, a solid foundation of knowledge. But we need to keep learning to think critically about this information and to consider what steps we can take to protect ourselves in a world where the dollar might not be as stable as it once was.
This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. We'll delve further into the potential implications of this shift in part 2. Stay tuned.
One thing we haven't really touched on is the psychological side of all this.
What do you mean?
Well, there's this sense of complacency, almost denial in the West about the dollar's potential decline.
Like we're in this bubble.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We've been at the top for so long we can't even imagine a world where things are different.
But the sources you shared, they make it clear that the rest of the world isn't just sitting around waiting for us to figure things out. They're adapting, innovating, preparing for a future where the US dollar might not be king of the castle anymore.
Right, and that disconnect between how we see the world and what's actually happening, that's dangerous. It prevents us from taking the necessary steps to prepare for a potential shift.
One source actually compared the current dollar-based system to the least dirty shirt in the hamper.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
It's not perfect, but it's familiar, and we're scared to try anything else.
But what happens when that shirt starts falling apart at the seams?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where these alternative systems, like the one the BRICS nations are developing, become so important.
Right, they're offering a different shirt, maybe one that fits better and is less stained.
Maybe even a whole new wardrobe.
Haha, possibly. But seriously, the emergence of these alternative financial systems, it's a direct response to the perceived flaws and limitations of the current dollar-dominated system.
Okay, but even if the dollar loses its top spot, the U.S. still has the largest, most dynamic economy in the world, right?
Sure, but it's important to avoid complacency. Remember our discussion about the U.S. national debt and Triffin's dilemma?
Yeah, that was kind of a bummer.
Well, it gets even more concerning when you factor in a potential decline in the dollar. As foreign investors become less willing to hold U.S. treasuries, the government will have to either raise interest rates or print more money.
And neither of those options sounds very good.
Exactly. Raising interest rates could slow down the economy. Printing more money could lead to inflation. It's a tough spot.
It's a catch-22. No matter what they do, there are going to be consequences.
That's right.
And it really highlights the fragility of the current system. One source pointed out that foreign ownership of U.S. Treasury securities has been steadily declining over the past decade.
Oh, wow. So people are quietly losing confidence in the U.S.'s ability to manage its finances.
And this trend ties back into the concept of financial repression, which, as we discussed, is becoming less and less effective. It distorts the market, punishes savers, and leads to a buildup of risk.
It's like slamming on the gas and the brakes at the same time.
That's a good way to put it. One source was talking about how Japan is trying to stimulate its economy while also trying to prop up its currency, and it just doesn't seem to be working.
So if all this is happening, what can we do about it? Are we just powerless to stop the dollar's decline?
I don't think that's the right question to ask. The focus shouldn't be on preventing a shift in the global financial order, which is probably inevitable. It's more about adapting to this new reality.
Okay, so instead of clinging to a sinking ship, we should be figuring out how to build a lifeboat. Exactly. One of our sources offered a really interesting perspective. They said that instead of viewing a dollar collapse as a disaster, we should see it as an opportunity
Opportunity to do what?
to rebuild, to create a fairer, more resilient system.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more.
Well, this source argued that a new system should prioritize sound money, individual freedom, and economic stability principles that have been eroded by decades of central banking and financial manipulation.
I like the sound of that, but how do we actually create this new system?
That's the million-dollar question. It requires a shift in thinking, a willingness to question the status quo and explore alternatives. It also requires recognizing that the current system isn't sustainable and that change is not only necessary but potentially beneficial.
So if we were to imagine this new system, this better system, what would it look like?
It would need to address the fundamental flaws of the current one. It would have to be decentralized, transparent, and resistant to manipulation. It would need to empower individuals rather than institutions.
That sounds a lot like Bitcoin.
It does, doesn't it? Bitcoin embodies many of the principles that would be essential for a more sustainable and equitable financial system.
Okay, so let's talk more about Bitcoin. It seems like it's more than just a speculative investment. Our sources describe it as a potential solution, a way to escape the problems of the current system.
Bitcoin's decentralized nature, its fixed supply, and its resistance to censorship make it a compelling alternative to fiat currencies.
Fiat currencies, you mean government-issued currencies?
Exactly. It offers a way to opt out of a system that many people see as rigged against them.
One source described Bitcoin as a barometer of the health of the traditional financial system. Essentially, as confidence in the dollar and other fiat currencies erodes, demand for Bitcoin increases.
That's a really important point. Bitcoin's value isn't just driven by speculation. It also reflects the underlying health of the current financial system.
So as that system becomes more unstable, Bitcoin becomes more appealing.
Right. And that source also made a really interesting point about the volatility of Bitcoin.
Yeah, it goes up and down like crazy.
Right. But he argued that those price swings are actually a sign of its health. He said that because Bitcoin has a relatively small market capitalization compared to other global currencies, it's more sensitive to changes in sentiment and global events.
So the fact that Bitcoin's price moves more dramatically than, say, the US dollar doesn't mean it's unstable. It just means it's more responsive to change.
Exactly. And it's also worth noting that as Bitcoin's market capitalization grows, its volatility will likely decrease.
So it's actually getting more stable over time.
That's the trend we've been observing.
One source even went so far as to say that Bitcoin could be the ultimate escape from the current system. He called it a revolt of the plebeians.
I remember that.
Look,
it's a powerful
He
analogy.
compared it to ancient Rome, where the common people would just leave the city when they were unhappy with the ruling class.
And the elites would eventually have to give in because they needed those people to function.
Exactly. It speaks to the potential of Bitcoin to shift the balance of power away from centralized institutions and back to individuals.
It's a fascinating idea.
Like, we have this choice. We can stay on the sinking ship and hope for the best. Or we can take control of our own financial future by opting out of the system entirely.
And embracing something new.
Right. And there's this incredible story in one of the sources about the GameStop short squeeze back in 2021.
Ah, yes, the GameStop saga.
It perfectly illustrates how the system is rigged against regular people.
It's a classic David versus Goliath story.
So this group of individual investors on Reddit, they realized that hedge funds had bet heavily against GameStop.
Meaning they would profit if the stock price went down.
Right. And these everyday investors decided to fight back. They started buying up GameStop stock, pushing the price higher and higher.
It was remarkable. A decentralized group of individuals empowered by technology challenging powerful financial institutions.
But here's the really messed up part. As the price of GameStop kept rising, these big brokerage firms like Robinhood, they literally shut off the buy button.
A controversial move.
It was blatant market manipulation. They were trying to protect the hedge funds that had bet against GameStop.
That's how many people saw it. And it exposed the inherent conflicts of interest in the financial system. It fueled this growing distrust of institutions that many believe are rigged against them.
And one of the sources featured this Wall Street analyst who witnessed all of this firsthand. He was so disgusted that he quit his job and became a Bitcoin advocate.
Wow, that's quite a story.
It shows how powerful these events can be. For many people, the GameStop saga was a wake-up call.
A realization that the system isn't working for them.
Exactly. And this analyst, he called this incident a financial revolution, a protest against a broken system.
He's not alone in that sentiment. Many people are looking for alternatives.
And he argued that the only way to really fight back is to opt out entirely, to embrace decentralized alternatives like Bitcoin.
That's a pretty radical idea.
It is. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about money value and the role of institutions.
It's mind-blowing to think that this whole movement could have been sparked by something as seemingly insignificant as a short squeeze on a video game retailer's stock.
It shows that even small events can have massive consequences.
The GameStop saga was a symptom of a much larger problem, this growing dissatisfaction with the current financial system.
And this desire for something different, something better.
And that's where Bitcoin comes in. It's not just a currency, it's a symbol of resistance.
A tool for empowerment.
It represents a way to break free from the constraints of a system that many people believe no longer serves them.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. It's clear that the dollar's dominance is facing some serious challenges. But it's also clear that there are alternatives. Opportunities to create a better, fairer, more resilient financial system.
And in part 3, we'll explore what those alternatives might look like and what steps you can take to navigate this shifting landscape.
So we've been talking a lot about how individuals are reacting to this potential decline of the dollar. But it's not just individuals, right? Countries are taking notice too.
Oh, absolutely, especially in the East. One of the sources highlighted how some countries are just gobbling up gold.
Like it's going out of style.
It's fascinating. They're playing the long game, recognizing that a shift in the global financial order could have huge implications for their economic and geopolitical power.
One source, an expert on geopolitical economics, argued that China's massive gold buying spree isn't just about economics. He suggested that China's actively trying to weaken the dollar's grip and position itself as a leader in this new multipolar world.
It's like they're preparing for a world where the U.S. isn't calling all the shots anymore.
Exactly. He even suggested that China might be encouraging its own citizens to buy gold as a way to increase national reserves without directly intervening in the market.
It's a pretty clever strategy if you think about it. It highlights how sophisticated some countries are being in navigating this changing financial landscape.
So they're playing 4D chess while we're still trying to figure out checkers.
Something like that. And this expert also talked about how China's using its economic clout to forge new trade relationships and create alternative financial systems that bypass the dollar altogether.
So they're not just sitting around complaining. They're taking action.
They're making deals in yuan, investing in huge infrastructure projects around the world, and building institutions like the BRICS New Development Bank that directly challenge the dominance of Western-led institutions like the World Bank and the IMF.
So it's not just about gold, it's about building a whole new system.
Yeah, it's a clear sign that we're moving towards a multipolar world where power is more distributed among several major players.
And this shift away from the dollar, it's already having a real impact. One source pointed out that the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has dropped significantly in recent years, from 71% 2 decades ago to just 58% in 2022.
And that trend is likely to continue, potentially even accelerating, as more countries look to diversify their holdings.
So the dollar is losing its grip. It's like a slow leak that they can't seem to patch.
The measures being taken to prop up the dollar are becoming less and less effective. The underlying problems, excessive debt, and a reliance on financial manipulation, they're too big to ignore.
And this expert, he was pretty critical of how the U.S. has been responding to this challenge.
Yeah, he said that the Western media often downplays the significance of de-dollarization. It's like they're trying to pretend it's not happening.
Maybe they're hoping if they ignore it long enough, they'll just go away.
Well, ignoring the problem won't make it go away. This denial prevents us from having an honest conversation about the challenges we face and from developing effective strategies to adapt to a changing world.
This expert even called out some big-name economists who have been saying that concerns about de-dollarization are overblown.
It's understandable that some people are resistant to change. It challenges long-held assumptions about the U.S.'s position in the global economy. But the reality is that things are shifting, and we need to be prepared.
So if the dollar is in decline, the world's moving towards this multipolar system, and the traditional solutions like financial repression aren't working, what's the answer? What happens next?
Well, one of our sources, a financial analyst who's been studying these trends for years, had a pretty stark assessment.
What did he say?
He argued that the dollar is heading for a collapse. Yeah, and he said that the only way to protect yourself is to get out of the system entirely.
Get out entirely. What does that even mean?
He was advocating for a complete rejection of fiat currencies and a shift towards alternative assets like gold, Bitcoin, and other cryptocurrencies. He argues that these assets aren't subject to the same manipulation and control as government-issued currencies.
So it's like he's saying abandon ship, the dollar's going down, and you better find a lifeboat before it's too late.
It's definitely a dramatic take, but it reflects the level of concern among some who are closely following these trends.
I can see why they'd be concerned. But is abandoning the system entirely really the only option?
Well, he made a really interesting point about events like the GameStop short squeeze. He sees those events as early warning signs of a much larger financial reckoning.
So those incidents, those are like cracks in the foundation of the current system.
Exactly. He believes the system is becoming increasingly unstable and vulnerable to collapse.
And he also talked about how these technological advancements, especially the rise of cryptocurrencies, are fundamentally changing how we think about money and finance.
That's a key point. He argued that these new technologies are empowering individuals, reducing the power of central banks, and creating opportunities for a more decentralized and equitable financial system.
It's exciting and terrifying all at the same time.
Yeah, we're witnessing a historical transformation, a shift in power and control unlike anything we've seen before.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is that the world is changing and we need to adapt. The dollar's dominance is waning, alternative systems are emerging, and new technologies are disrupting the traditional financial order. This isn't a time for complacency or denial. It's a time for education, critical thinking, and action.
It's a wake-up call. We need to understand what's happening, assess our own financial vulnerabilities, and explore the alternatives that are available to us.
This deep dive has hopefully given everyone a solid foundation of knowledge. But the journey doesn't end here. It's crucial to keep learning to stay informed and to be prepared for a future that might look very different from the present.
This has been an incredible deep dive. It's clear that we're at a crossroads. The decisions we make today will have a profound impact on our financial future. So as always, the most important thing is to think for yourself, question assumptions, and make choices that align with your own values and goals. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.